Hello. Long time no see, right? So with this master's, I have done the absolute opposite of cutting my hair and getting a job, because I've been growing my undercut out and become unemployed academic. So for the future, I have a lot of time on my hands to yap about stuff that I find really, really interesting with archaeology and history and folklore and stuff like that. So the time has come. I have actually been wanting to make this video ever since 2018, before I had a YouTube channel at all. I have some really old videos on this channel. I disavow everything and anything, just in case, before I got my master's degree. So from this point in time, now I stand for exactly everything I say. Back then, I don't remember, so I will just disavow it. Specifically, I want to talk about the Birka warrior that turned out to be a woman. This one is a controversial one, and I will explain to you exactly why and what I think about it. So, let's begin! I'm so excited! For over a century, this was celebrated as the ultimate Viking warrior grave, discovered in the 1870s under a massive visible boulder at the trading post of Birka. This is grave BJ 581, and this grave had it all: battle weapons, shields, armor-piercing arrows, and the remains of 2 sacrificed horses. The assumption by 19th century historians were immediate and absolute. Here lays an elite male warlord. So what happened was that in 2017, science took a leap for the better, actually, where an ancient DNA analysis sent shockwaves throughout the global scientific community. Because this ultimate Viking warlord, like an accepted fact for many, many, many years, turned out to be female. So instantly, of course, an international media storm erupted. Public spaces as well as academic spaces did not really know what to do about this information. And they all kind of clashed over this deeply unsettling question: have we actually been wrong? Could a woman in the Viking Age actually be somebody? Very unsettling questions indeed. Could a woman in the Viking Age actually be connected to warfare? Or is this some modern rewriting of history with an agenda? That is where I come in. Today we will separate myth from fact. To understand why this specific discovery broke the internet, we have to travel back to the late 19th century. The Swedish scholar Hjalmar Stolpe excavated over 1,100 graves at Birka. He was meticulously scientific for his time, being the first in Sweden to systematically use graph paper in the fieldwork. His interpretations were bound by 19th century cultural historical norms. I have personally looked through his documentation and his notes, and let me tell you, it was a lot. What we have to understand firstly is the context of things, right? And in the 19th century, within archaeology, gender was not something you determined through testing bones or using science in that kind of a way, because it didn't exist. So what could you do then? You had to kind of assume based upon the artifacts present in the grave. If a grave had weapons, then it was assumed that it was a male grave, or if a grave had sewing needles or beads, it was assumed to be a woman. Because the grave BG 581 was filled with cavalry gear and a rare full gaming board that has earlier been interpreted to be buried together with military leaders, Stolpe quite naturally declared it to be a male skeleton in the grave in a letter in 1878, as well as in his notes. The fact that 1,100 graves were excavated by Stolpe and his gang, it raises some interesting questions since it was the 1800s. Is Stolpe a reliable narrator? On one hand, critics defend Stolpe's training as a zoologist, arguing his structural observations shouldn't be dismissed lightly. But on the other hand, we can look at his actual track record. Stolpe's gender attributions reveal major inconsistencies. He routinely labeled graves male based purely on weapons, even when no human bones were left to examine. He let his cultural expectation override scientific notation. So when critics tell us to just trust the original excavation, they are trusting a narrator who let 19th century gender roles dictate much of his data. And on the other hand, when they say that nothing he has done can be trusted at all due to artistic differences in his field sketches versus his later detailed drawings of these graves, they take away any scholarly integrity that Stolpe's incredible work actually possessed. So we end up at a pretty interesting place. When genomic and isotopic technology actually proved in 2017 that this was indeed a female buried in BG 581, the backlash was rather quick. Critics weren't really open or ready to accept a real-life, so to say, shield maiden. So they lashed out online and attacked the methodology of these scientists that had done the research. Let's break down the main arguments against this being a female warrior grave. And I have divided this list into 4 main categories. The first one is bone confusion or mislabeling. Then there's the double grave theory. Wait, I have arthritis, I can't really do that, I'm sorry. Then we have the symbolic weapons theory. The fourth one is the lack of battle trauma. First and foremost, critics argued that because the grave was excavated over a century ago, and it was handled with explosions, the skeletal remains must have been disturbed more than Stolpe would have us know. And then further on, like if archaeologists during these times used explosive, then they must have been sloppy. And if they were sloppy, they must have marked the skeletal remains incorrectly as well, because they're already sloppy enough to use explosives. You see where the argument is kind of going. And this leads us into the double grave theory, that perhaps it was actually a male in the grave, and that the male skeleton has completely decomposed by the time that Stolpe came there, and it's only the lady left of the double grave. Some have even said that this would have been a slave woman on top of that. That's very specific claims to make. And the third point, which is like a rather good point, is that, weapons don't have to mean that someone is a warrior, right? They can have symbolistic value in a grave. There is the claim of that the axes and the arrows and the swords and the spears and the everything. It's just symbolism, guys. It's just symbolism. Move on, move on. Let me tell you, I have seen the content of this grave in real life, and I do agree that there seems to have been one spear that has been of symbolic value, since it looks like it has actually never been used before the burial much at all. The other stuff doesn't really look like that. But there is a fair point in that stuff in graves can have symbolic value. That is completely, valid. And this leads us to the point that the skeleton itself does not showcase any trauma, any war-related trauma. So if this was a warrior, why doesn't her bones have any type of war damage? And here's just a little ding in the side of these points. Do you think that they found her whole skeleton? The criticism sounds sound and logical on paper, but when we look deeper into the empirical records and the researchers' 2019 defense article, the pushback starts looking less like scientific caution, and maybe it is something completely else that is more culturally colored. Let's look at the actual findings. First and foremost, I want to make it abundantly clear that there has been no mix-up of the bones. There has been a loss of the cranium during a move. If you did not know this, in museums collections, especially the History Museum in Stockholm, which is has the biggest collection, I bet, in all of Sweden. The collections, even at a rather small museum, is huge, because not everything is on display in the exhibitions. Not even half of it, not even a third of it is in the exhibitions. Maybe 1/100th is in the actual exhibitions. The skull is probably still there somewhere, It is just like finding one cranium in the sea of thousands of craniums. I bet no one has just, gotten to it yet. But every single other skeletal piece analyzed is structurally still intact. And it is not just intact, it also aligns with Stolpe's sketches. And they are clearly, all of them, labeled with BJ 581 with ink from the, from Stolpe's excavation. And when they did the isotopic and DNA analysis, they extracted from 2 separate parts of the skeletons that wasn't connected to each other. They took from the humerus and a canine tooth, which would then confirm without any doubt that these different skeletal parts were in fact belonging to the same person, and they belonged to this one single female individual. Osteologists had in the past looked at the hip bone of the skeleton, and they had not been able to prove it, but they thought that this looks more like a female hip bone than a male one. It is from this cranium going missing, as well as these different skeletal parts, that has led up to the double grave theory. The double grave theory is a myth because it cannot be proven. In all of Stolpe's excavation notes, in all of Stolpe's letters where he talks about this one specific grave, in all of Stolpe's sketches, there is only one human skeleton present. And that is not in one single little note that he has written. That he has full-on field drawings, he has talked to other people about this grave, he has written down notes. It is all there. It's one skeleton in this grave. The skeleton that he talks about and the pieces of the skeleton that he talks about is indeed the same ones that we have in front of us today. The rumors of this second individual actually started because of a misplaced femur. This misplaced femur, they just needed to look at it because it also contained an ink specification on it, like all of the other skeletal parts, as well as there were some rib pieces that someone thought had belonged to another person, but it turned out that these pieces were actually from the horse's skeleton. There were 2 horses in this grave. At point 3, which is where is the skeletal trauma, right? If this woman was indeed involved with warfare, she should have scars on her skeleton, right? That's fair. Or is it? Is it fair? There are completely clean-cut examples of warrior graves. The boat grave at Salme in Estonia is one of these. In the Salme case, there are several individuals that has been confirmed mostly male, that has, undoubtable skeletal trauma, because these guys, they went down fighting. It is very consistent with a violent conflict. I don't think that a dude just randomly hacks himself 3 times over the skull with an axe. BG 581 does not exhibit these types of injuries, at least not on the skeletal parts that we actually still have. So it comes down to norm within archaeology, and the norm within archaeology is, as a matter of fact, that many times we do not find skeletal remains at all. The lack of skeletal trauma is actually very, very common in graves that has been labeled or categorized as warrior graves. Take the warriors buried in the boats in Sweden, for example, with helmets and weaponries buried in Valsgärde. There's been absolutely no question at all if these are men and if they are warriors. Because here is an undefeated fact for everyone. Human bodies put straight into the soil decomposes over centuries. They heavily decompose. I tell you, many times there is no skeletons at all. There is this double standard, and I'm not saying that it is with intent, but I'm saying there is a double standard. When we analyze weapon-equipped graves confirmed to be genetically male, scholars immediately label them as warriors in scientific literature without really needing to prove that every single bone has a sword wound present on it. Yet, when the exact same elite military context belongs to a proven female, the scrutiny is aggressively intensified, demanding an unattainable level of absolute proof. Because there is nothing with the BJ 581 grave that is actually out of the ordinary It's not out of the ordinary procedure with how it has been recorded. It absolutely falls within the standards of how you should record an ancient leaving during an excavation and then analyzing it in the collection. It's very standard. This all brings us to this huge debate and, quite frankly, shitstorm that took a hold of this whole subject. And this massive discussion is still very much active and taking place on the highest levels of Viking Age scholarship. There is prominent historians that have pushed back a lot on this very topic, where even articles have been released with "Viking woman lived in a man's world." Da, 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 da. This argument, besides laying on top of a lot of cultural baggage, that we all carry around, it also relies heavily on linguistics, which is interesting, because the statement is that the Old Norse word vikingar or vikinger is grammarly a male noun. So since the word is a male noun, only men went to raid and trade. I bet you cannot think of a single other instance in any language where these female and male nouns are not completely realistic, or languages where nouns do not exist at all might not be the strongest base you can build upon your argument that only men ever did this one specific thing because the grammar said so. Like using ancient language to construct rigid historical gender hierarchies, then you're just ignoring the physical and cultural reality that human beings actually live in. And you're also ignoring the actual physical evidence that has been left in the ground. Here is the most crucial part of what I found researching this, that completely dismisses the idea that BJ 581 is alone anomaly. She was not the only one, even in the Birka burial field. As I earlier stated, I have gone through these graves in this specific part of the burial field where BJ 581 was found. And I found around 20 other graves that showcases the similar pattern of person, stuff, horses by the feet on a plateau combination. There is a pattern there that emerges. If we look at grave BG 834, much like BG 581, it was structurally furnished with full martial weapons and elite riding horses. And osteological analyses have confirmed that the skeletal remains inside this grave, they also belong exclusively to a female. So a woman that also has a bunch of stuff, horses and weapons. So I guess there was a lot of just slave women that didn't decompose while the cool warrior dude just decomposed. Stolpe historically dismissed graves like 834, 735, 750 as double graves because they contained a mix of weapons and then also female status symbols like mirrors. But we know now from recent DNA-confirmed weapons and mirror graves, like one uncovered in England that we will get back to, talking about that one in a while, that these high-status women carried both elite female symbols and functional weapons of war. So BJ 581 belongs to an established class of weapon burials right inside of the Birka garrison itself. And if we look beyond in the Iron Age burial record, the traditional binary view of graves start to slowly fall apart. Take the Nødre Sjølen grave in Norway. Female burial containing weapons where her biological sex was never questioned. But in the 1980s, archaeologists dismissed her in other ways by claiming that yeah, it's a woman, but the sword grip is way too large for a woman to use. But like empirical evidence showcases that like a Viking Age sword weighed around 1 to 2 kilos, like a milk carton. And that is like, well within the capabilities of most adults and young people, maybe even children. The thing with weapons as well is that they are balanced, right? It is not so that, I wouldn't be able to maybe successfully swing around a milk package as good as I could swing around a sword, because it is made to be balanced, stab them with the pointy end. And speaking about the pointy end, these weapons were sharp, right? These weapons were so sharp. Have you ever tried to throw an axe, to swing a real sword, or throw a spear, or shoot an arrow? I do not think that the receiving end, getting that sharpness into you with any type of force at all, it's not a lot of force. We're not talking like, late medieval knight swords over here. We're talking very light, sharp objects that easily cuts through like skin and bone even. We also have an amazing Iron Age grave from Suntaka in Finland. In 2022, genetic testing revealed that the individual buried with high status weaponry, also with women clothing, which was very interesting. 2 swords and then women brooches. This individual had an XXY karyotype. This is medically called as Klinefelter syndrome. And this individual is recognized like this. And this kind of also shatters the belief that back in the Iron Age, people were just like, if you look different, if you were different, you could just go out in the woods and die. Like, in the Viking series where they put out Ivar the Boneless and he's just, you can die, little misformed baby. The fact is that human empathy is actually not something that, was invented yesterday. Which brings us even further abroad to the Saryggbulun cemetery in the Tuva Republic. A warrior long assumed to be male, based upon their weapon grave goods, was genetically revealed in 2020 to be a 13-year-old girl. Let's get back to the England example that we talked about earlier. In 2023, an archaeological discovery in the Isle of Scilly in England provided a fascinating parallel to the Birka burial. An Iron Age grave containing an individual buried with a unique combination of objects, a functional sword and a bronze mirror. While traditional cultural historical assumptions might have previously misread such a mixed assemblage as a double burial, a modern analysis of the tooth enamel confirmed that the grave belonged to exclusively a biological female. And this discovery strongly reinforces the argument surrounding BJ 581 and BJ 834, demonstrating that high-status ancient women could simultaneously possess both female-coded symbols of elite identity and the weaponry of a warrior. Perhaps the most telling about the academic pushback is how critics almost systematically forgets a very important part of the grave goods in BJ 581. This grave is seen as flawed in a way where it only contains male-coded artifacts. So therefore, it's a slave woman or it's just his wife, the real warrior of the grave. That's his wife that we found. He has gone away. There is a mirror in BJ 581. There's over 40 mirror shards. It turns into cherry picking, essentially. By ignoring a definite piece of material evidence that directly links BJ 581 to elite female burial tradition, this criticism showcases how it is actually less about empirical caution and more about defending an outdated assumption. You cannot state that it is impossible, there are male things in here, so therefore the man is gone and this is his slave woman. After doing my research, I found that the debate and the criticism surrounding BJ 581 is mostly rooted in feelings and less about what we physically can actually analyze in front of us. So, where does this leave us? Right now, the academic community is kinda stuck in a loop. Leading scholars are essentially talking over each other, trying to reinterpret historical facts that cannot be changed. Stolpe's 19th century notes are what they are, and the DNA is what it is. Instead of endless ideological debates, the future of archaeology could require us to lean into hard, forward-looking science. We need to stop arguing over dynamites and old text that we can't change, and start looking at the ground. with new technology. By using modern mapping and GIS databases, it is possible to see exactly what excavation has been taking place when. Future research could apply soil micromorphology and geochemical analysis directly to the Birka graves. Recently proven at site ring fortresses like Borgring in Denmark allow us to scientifically reconstruct the exact burial processes, track soil disturbances, and see post-depositional changes. So there has been basically soil testing which has found invisible Vikings since, again, it is not always you can find skeletons because they have disappeared into the earth. But by testing soil, a couple of years back, it was actually possible to find invisible Vikings and their horses. And they could even say that the horses had been sacrificed in the grave, since they also found horse, which would happen if you sacrifice the horse there and then with the buried person. And that hard data is objective, and it can actually resolve these questions of provenance. Through science, we can actually move ourselves out of this loop of discussing who did what in the 1800s and who did not do what in the 1800s. We cannot change what Hjalmar Stolpe did or did not do. Then we can move, from this loop where everyone is discussing someone else's notes. We can move past personal theories into concrete empirical answers. If it actually matters that much that the Birka warrior is and was a woman. The controversy of the Birka warrior highlights something about how we process history. When modern museums build historical exhibits, they often default to familiar stereotypes. Men get the heritage of hard technology, journeys, weapons, while women are regulated strictly to domestic life. And of course, human cultural norms existed in the ancient world as well. That's not to say that also humans with agency and their own thoughts and feelings and wants and needs existed in the ancient world. This has happened to scholars in the past as well, where they have based their whole career upon writing and researching something, and then new technology comes and just like a house of cards, it just falls down. I can fully understand how frustrating that must be. But graves like BG 581 and quite frankly 834 as well, and these surrounding discoveries we've talked about, they force us to dismantle these neat little boxes that we have built our theories into. Biological sex is fixed by science, but social gender is something completely different. That is something that is social. It is dynamic. And through history and archaeology, we can collect a couple of clues about that social reality. But the honest answer is that we actually have no idea. Really, the Birka warrior individual didn't, become a woman in 2017. She was always there, all the time, ruling her space and waiting for technology and for our minds to actually catch up to reality of living a human life. Well, this is corny, but like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts about this subject down in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Hejdå!